Thank you all for having me. I tell you what, I'd like to thank the foundation for having this dialogue. I think it's long overdue. We face some tremendous challenges out there today, and we need to have more discussions like this. I've got very limited amount of time, and I want to do a couple things today. I want to talk about, from a utilities perspective, what we see as our strategy going forward. But before I do that, I really want to give you a feel for what is the environment, what are the challenges we see out there. So when we talk about strategy, we know what the challenges are that we're trying to address. So I'm going to try to do that very quickly and then look forward to your questions later. From an environment standpoint, the first thing that we've got to take into account if you're an electric utility is Georgia's a growth state. Our information is the fourth fastest growing state in the nation. I just heard the third. You know, either way, Georgia is growing very quickly. By 2030, we expect to have another almost 5 million people in the state of Georgia. I hate to tell you, but the commute's not going to get any better. All right, what does that mean from an electric utility standpoint? That means we're going at about 800 to 1,000 megawatts a year. That's great. What does that mean? That's about one major coal or nuclear power plant each and every year in the state to be able to keep up with the growth that we have. Georgia Power is growing at about half that rate, and then the EMCs and municipalities are growing at about the same rate. Between now and 2018, Georgia Power will need 9,000 megawatts of new and replacement generation. That is a staggering number. The next thing that we need to understand is that we're in a rising cost environment. Now, I'm sure that's news to you, isn't it? How many of you were not aware of that? But it is interesting if you look at this slide, because what it shows, this is a slide of U.S. average electricity prices. From 1985 to 2000, U.S. average electricity prices went up by 6%. Now, 6% in 15 years is not bad. That's much less than the cost of inflation. But look at what's happened from 2000 to 2007. 34% increase over that time period. Something fundamentally is changing in the United States from the way that we have traditionally produced generation. So let's look a little bit closer and see if we can determine what that is. If you look at the majority of generation throughout the United States, it's primarily coal and natural gas. These are the ratios of coal and natural gas for Georgia Power Company. From an energy standpoint, we're about 66% coal, 16% gas. And from a capacity standpoint, we're about 44% coal, 37% natural gas. So let's look a little deeper. What are some of the pricing pressures that we're facing on our traditional energy sources, coal and natural gas? Why do we have to do something different as we move forward? We're going to look first at coal. You've really got three primary factors that are impacting the cost of coal-fired generation. The first is environmental cost, then international demand, and the last is uncertainty around carbon. And I'd like to give you some examples of how this is impacting us specifically here at Georgia. From an environmental standpoint, from 1993 to the year 2008, over about the last 15 years, Georgia Power has invested over $2.4 billion in environmental controls for our plants. Now, during that period of time, the population has grown by about 50%, 58%. So we've had to build additional generation to serve the growing population of Georgia. But because of that investment, that $2.4 billion, we've been able to reduce the emissions from our power plants in total by between 40 and 60%. So we've gotten a tremendous return for that $2.4 billion. Now, what are we going to do going forward? Going forward, between now and 2015, Georgia Power is going to invest an additional $4.4 billion in the latest environmental controls, primarily for our coal-fired generators. What is that going to enable us to do? Well, again, because of that capital investment, we're going to be able to reduce the primary emissions to between 85 and 95% from the levels they were in 1990. And that's your NOx and your SO2. In addition, remove about 75% of the mercury. So from an environmental standpoint, we're getting a tremendous return from that $6.8, almost $7 billion. But the problem with that is, after you invest that $6.8 billion, you get no additional kilowatt hour output from those plants. So what is that doing to the cost of generation coming from those coal-fired plants? It is raising the cost of generation because of the cost of the environmental controls. Now, the second thing we're seeing is international demand. The chart up in the top left is a comparison of GDP growth from China and the United States. China is growing at about a 10% compounded annual growth rate each and every year for the last decade. That is phenomenal. If we had 10% growth rate in the United States in 1 year, think of what that would be. But to compound that over 10 years with 1 billion people is just unbelievable. So how's that impacting the price we pay for coal in the state of Georgia? Well, it is fundamentally changing the supply and demand curve for commodities. We are now competing with China and India and other emerging nations for coal, and that's raising the price of coal. But many of y'all in the business community know it's not just coal. It is all your major commodities. It's concrete, it's steel, it's labor. So we've got a fundamental change in the supply and demand curve, and that's impacting coal prices. The last thing is carbon uncertainty. At the end of the day, we feel it's very likely we will have some type of carbon legislation within the next 3 to 6 years. So it makes it very difficult to invest in new coal-fired generation when you don't know the magnitude of that policy decision and how it would impact billions of dollars worth of investments. So you roll that all together, what are we seeing on the price that we pay for coal within the state of Georgia? 2002 to 2008, Central Appalachian coal has gone up 243% in that 6-year period. Powder River Basin about 140. On top of that, transportation costs have gone up 70%. So you can see why we've got to look at new options. Let's look quickly at natural gas. Because of a lot of things we just described, natural gas has been the fuel of choice for generation in the United States for the last decade to 2 decades. And in a way, it is electric generation that is adding significantly to the volatility in the prices of natural gas. Now, the same time period, we have seen natural gas prices go from $2.27 to $13 peak to peak per MMBTU. That's an increase of 473% in that 6-year period. And when you talk about natural gas, you get a compounding effect. If you look at the price to produce 1 kilowatt hour from a natural gas plant, 60 to 80% of the cost of that kilowatt hour comes from the cost of the natural gas itself. So when you're talking about a 473% increase in the price of natural gas, that's a 473% increase on 60 to 80% of the cost of your product. Nuclear, about 10% of the cost to produce 1 kilowatt hour is the fuel cost itself. So you can see why we've got to look at diversification. We cannot continue to put all of our eggs in just the coal basket or just the gas basket going forward. We have to diversify that. So what are we doing? We're really looking at a multi-pronged approach. There is no silver bullet. There's not one thing. We've got to have more renewable and green energy. We've got to have more energy efficiency, and we've got to look at new baseload technologies such as nuclear. So let's look first at renewables and green energy. You hear a lot of debate about solar and wind, and you hear people say it's not cost effective. Others say that it is. So what's the truth? The truth is it depends on where it's located. The first graph in the top left corner is a graph showing solar potential throughout the United States. The dark red is where you have good potential for cost-effective solar, which is in the desert southwest. If you look at the southeast, there's not a lot of solar potential because of cloud cover to cost-effectively produce electricity from solar. The second chart is wind. T-Boone Pickens is right in the middle of the country. That's where you have the capability to cost-effectively produce wind. Look at the southeast. Almost no color whatsoever. So you don't have good potential in the southeast to produce electricity cost-effectively from wind. What we do have is we are rich in pine trees. We are rich in biomass capability. So you need to focus when you look at energy policy on what are the natural resources you have in your given region and take advantage of those. So what is Georgia Power doing? On the renewable and green energy side, we are asking the Public Service Commission for permission to convert one of our older coal-fired facilities from coal to biomass. It is Plant Mitchell in Albany, and if we move forward with that, it will be one of the largest biomass facilities in the United States. We're expanding our green program, and we're also doing more testing on different solar technologies. On the energy efficiency front, we've got 18 programs approved by the Commission, 9 of which were approved just last year. We're doing more than ever there. We hope within the next decade to have over 2,000 megawatts, which is about the size of a nuclear plant, dedicated to cost-effective energy efficiency where it makes sense for Georgians. And the last thing is we have to look at new baseload technologies to diversify our dependence on coal and natural gas resources. A couple of quick points on this. One thing that is very important is it's not just Georgia Power Company that is looking at new nuclear. This is an artist's rendition of 2 potential new nuclear units at our existing Plant Vogtle facility. We're asking the Public Service Commission for permission to move forward with this project. But the thing that's important is it's not just Georgia Power Company. It's all the major utilities in the state. Dalton Utilities, Oglethorpe Power, and MEAG. All of us have looked at the same set of information, the same challenges, and come to the same conclusion. What is different? I don't have time to go through this. I'd be happy to take questions later on. But there are many things that are different this go around than they were last time. We have a new licensing process. The federal government recognized that the licensing process had to be changed in the United States in order to get private industry willing to invest new capital. They have done that and made it much more simpler to the licensing process that's used throughout the rest of the world. We've come to standard designs. That just makes common sense. All the Westinghouse designs and GE will be basically the same. It makes sense for sharing best practices, for construction economies of scale, and also from the Nuclear Regulatory Commission to look at the same type of design over and over. And the last thing in Georgia that is critically important is the Integrated Resource Plan that was passed by the state legislature. The Public Service Commission is involved in all aspects of this decision. We're in front of them right now requesting a certificate to move forward, so they look at the same information that we do and they decide that they believe, like Georgia Power does, this is in the best interest of the state before that decision is made. Then they're involved in the construction process. We file quarterly reports, so they are very involved in monitoring the expenses during construction and then after operation. So that is very, very different. And these are some of the things that are fundamentally different this go around than they were last time. Where are we now? We filed our early site permit in August of this year showing that the site is suitable for 2 additional units. We have filed our construction and operation license this year. We expect to get that in summer of 2011. That's very important. Because Georgia Power moved quickly to evaluate this potential benefit for our customers, the federal government is offering production tax credits, or the possibility for that. Because we have moved early and met the key dates, if these are funded by the federal government, we have the potential of up to $125 million for an 8-year period, almost $1 billion that hopefully, if these are granted by the government, we can use to reduce the cost of that plant to our consumers because we moved early in this process. We signed the first engineering and procurement contract with Westinghouse and Shaw for construction. It's the first contract that's been signed in the United States in the past 30 years. Everybody's very interested about the expected cost of this plant. It is $6.4 billion if we don't start paying for the plant until it is completely in service. We're asking the Commission to consider allowing us to pay for the financing cost as we go. If we're able to do that, that would allow us to reduce the in-service cost of this plant down to about $4.5 billion. That's very important. If you don't do that, it's like using a credit card and not making a payment on interest or anything for 10 years. The interest compounds on itself. By the time it goes into service, the majority of what you're paying for is nothing but the interest itself. It's important that we just make those interest payments as we go to reduce the in-service cost of the plant. It's in front of the Public Service Commission right now. We expect a final decision in March of this year. And we think it is absolutely critical, as the other speakers have said, there's no one answer. Nuclear is not the answer to everything. We've got to take a diversified approach, and we've got to change the way we're doing things to respond to the marketplace. I've gone through that incredibly quick. I look forward to your questions after this, and again, thank you for having us today.